Dublab.
Welcome to the Quarantine Tapes, a daily podcast from Onassis, LA and dublab. Hosted by Paul Holdengräber, this series chronicles shifting paradigms in the era of social distancing.
Hello.
Hello, could I please speak with Father Greg Boyle?
Speaking.
Hello, this is Paul Holdengräber calling you from the Quarantine Tapes. I'm so delighted that you were able to take my call. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Tell me, where do I find you at the present time, and what have you been doing during these quarantine times?
I'm at home in my Jesuit community. There are 7 of us here. 2 of them were visiting and they got stuck here, so they couldn't leave. And one of them is looks like he got a flight finally to Ethiopia on Friday morning, so he will leave us now after several months here.
And what are you doing with your days?
I just jumped off a subcommittee Zoom for the governor's task force about rebuilding the state of California. So I have a lot of those things, a lot of Homeboy Industries Zoom meetings.
A lot of those things, and since you bring up the governor's task force on business and jobs recovery, I saw the very, very impressive list, and I'm curious that how you think you might be able to make a difference in that group, given that it's mainly CEOs, as I can see, and people who run very large businesses.
I think your guess is probably as good as mine. I have no idea. I figure on some level I'm the token religious person there, maybe. I have no idea. I think part of it is messaging and who are the messengers and who has credibility. And but obviously, when I was just on a subcommittee with Tim Cook and high-powered people, so I don't really know how to get broadband connectivity to the rural areas of California, but I'm hoping that Tim does. But if there's a kind of, I suppose in terms of a lot of this is leveraging message and positive change. And so how do you communicate all that stuff? So maybe that's why I'm in there.
It's not so easy. And yet, one of the things you're most known for is bringing people from different worlds together. And now they are bringing you on this committee. And I found that very interesting. And I'll be very curious to check in with you to see, how you have been able to help or influence them in some way. And if you have been able, I should say.
Well, yeah, I think part of it is the pandemic is this doorway. And so if we all choose to walk through this doorway together, something remarkable, we could very well have some radical change in the social contract if we decide to do this together, something that's more humane and compassionate in terms of our economy and how diverse it is, how equitable it is. And so I'm hopeful that this is kind of a moment of solidarity, unlike, I'm not sure we've ever seen anything like this.
Not in my lifetime.
Yeah, because it's a good thing, because I look at 9/11, and though it impacted everybody in terms of travel, it happened in some specific locales, as did as do hurricanes like Katrina, etc. And then I look at something like the unrest after '92 in Los Angeles when they wanted to rebuild LA, which was the name of the effort. And it's interesting how it kind of didn't work. But see, now we're interconnected, and I just have this feeling that people see this differently. So even when you say, the rich white curve is flattening, but the poor dark curve is on the rise, people can look at that and say, yeah, none of us are safe and protected unless all of us are. And so I'm sensing from people that we won't leave, normal alone. That we're going to try to not return to something, but to refashion something. Don't not just rebuild, but refashion it in a whole new, spacious, expansive envisioning. So I think all that's possible, and I think we should hold out for that.
Otherwise, what?
Why would we return to
what passes for normal?
Yeah, and as some, I guess, in our midst might tout a certain economy prior to the pandemic. Well, in what sense is that a booming economy when 80% of people who earn paychecks really can't survive after 2 paychecks? Once you stop that, they're stuck. And in what definition is that a booming economy? So who wants to return to that? So even ideas like, universal health care, or even, kind of a universal wage, all these things which, before the pandemic may have seemed fringe, now are, people are going, well, maybe what if we did do that? So anyway, I think there's a great deal of potential excitement in all this.
It's interesting because one of my guests was the philosopher Simon Critchley, who said that this is or could be, and I think you've expressed that as well, it could be a philosophical moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it actually could be. But we have to have the intentionality that it be that, and that we, that we insist upon it.
I'm so interested, Father Greg, by a word you use, which I never would have imagined finding in the way you use it, which is the word awe. What does that word mean for you, especially now in the midst of this pandemic? You say standing.
The word is
awe, AWE. Forgive my accent. I know it's impossible.
Oh, awe.
Yeah, awe. I'm sorry. I know. Imagine what it was like for my students when I was teaching to understand me. They were very often very confused. I remember one moment when, after a long year's lecture, a student said, "Professor Holdengräber," in those days I was that, "what do you mean by albeit?" And another student said, "Don't you know he means albeit?" Anyway, awe. You say standing in a place of awe, and I find that very interesting, and I think it's very related to what we already have spoken about.
Well, awe is the opposite of judgment. So when, once you can get society to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, then you cease to stand in judgment at how they carry it. And so the hope, especially in this new moment, is, and it's odd, because our heroic essential workers are low-wage workers, are people who live in low-income communities of color largely. And so now there's a kind of a sense, people that we used to ignore or dismiss or even disparage are now heroic essential workers, like in grocery stores and such, and people who take care of your parents in a convalescent home. So now you kind of bow to them, and so now we need to have an economy that kind of breaks through, so that these once disparaged, ignored people are brought up to some living wage and just treatment. So so awe keeps us from judgment, from demonizing and from labeling people in that way. So my hope is that we'll kind of get there.
I'm hopeful too. I always remember that wonderful line, maybe attributed to Walt Whitman, where he says, "Be curious, not judgmental."
Yeah, exactly.
I leave a silence because I feel this is a moment where we've come to some crossing point where, as you say, perhaps there might be a return to a different way of living, other priorities. I'm going to read you a quotation from James Baldwin that came to my mind as I was preparing to speak with you. He says, "I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hates so stubbornly is because they sense once hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with pain."
Yeah, I think so too. And everything is about wound. And are you a friend with your wound? And are you a stranger to yourself? And so, we're prone to kind of address things as if they're out in the air, like racism or greed or white supremacy or homophobia or anti-Semitism, as if they kind of exist in some out in the ether, when it's really about health, and it's not about mental illness, it's about mental injury. And so nobody healthy is a racist. That's never happened in the history of the world. So then maybe you can start to address things in a different way. And so in much the same way as I said earlier, none of us are safe and protected unless all of us are. But by the same token, none of us are well unless all of us are well. And so how can we get to this place of kinship and connection where we belong to each other and where we can say, I won't stop until you are peaceful and healthy and happy. And so all these other things are like at Homeboy, I think we all kind of learn not to be tripped up by the behavior, because the behavior is but an indicator. It's pointing beyond itself to wound and pain. Gosh. Then we can break through, to as I would call it, sort of God's dream come true, which is kinship. There is no us and them. There's just us. And so hopefully we'll get there. I have a feeling. I'm hopeful.
I never tire remembering the origin of the word kinship, which really truly means being of kin, which then created the term so important of kindness, and of kindness not being, as it's so often portrayed, a weak quality.
Yeah, prisoners and gang members always say, I don't want them to mistake my kindness for weakness, and yet kindness is the only strength there is. And even kind of, as we talk now in a way I've never heard us talk about really as a society, is about the tribalism. And that, even in the Christian sense, the early Christians would greet each other with a big old fat, wet kiss on the lips. And the reason they did was because you only did that to your kin. to your blood relative. And so they were trying to indicate, no, this is a whole new thing now. Everybody is kin. And it was kind of supposed to be, the end of the tribal notion that only your people. And so, that's the hope. That's the entire effort, is to somehow get to the other side of this, where it's about being connected, only connect to each other. And that demonizing is really the opposite of truth, always. And there are no exceptions to that. So that's kind of freeing to know this isn't ever correct. There are no demons. So once you can kind of let go of that notion, then you can inch your way closer to where we are kin with each other, planting big old wet kisses on the lips, which is hard to do with social distancing.
Yeah, it is now, yes.
But that will come later.
That too will pass. I was fascinated to read that you had met Cesar Chavez, and I'm curious, what do you think he would say of this moment?
Well, I think he would, want to underscore the essential heroic workers that are the farm workers. And then, how do you elevate them as they're bringing food to your table? That's how it's different. I think when he walked among us, I think there was, when you kind of say taking for granted, well, clearly people took farm workers for granted. But now we're in a different stage, because we're, whether we're food secure or insecure, we see it as a lifeline. And again, it might be self-interest that initially motivates us, but it might get us to a place where we say, yeah, we're not that different, and we need each other. And so I think that's an important step. And again, that's, you can say, I've never seen this in my lifetime. I'm 65 years old. But I've never seen this response to this, which is a very unifying, and everybody talks about, the pandemic of 1918, how they didn't speak about it afterwards because people were ashamed at how they reacted, that they were selfish and they didn't really care about their neighbors. And it was kind of survival of the fittest, every man and woman for themselves, which I find fascinating because people didn't really pass along much oral tradition about that. And that was just 100 years ago. And yet, I don't find I don't think that's going to happen here.
You think there'll be a change?
Oh yeah, I think there already is. I mean, part of it is, because of the digital virtual connection.
Yeah. Maybe
that has something to do with it. But we're in a different place. I don't, 3 years from now, I don't think people are going to say, I'm ashamed of how I responded. Which was kind of, everybody seems to report that was a very common, pervasive experience to those who went through that pandemic 100 years ago. So I don't know. Again,
we don't know. We don't know, and people might not say I'm ashamed. They may though. The historians of the future who are writing perhaps already now may have some worries about how the country reacted to it, the people who lead us.
Yeah, people are also kind of underscoring how even the divisive, how partisan pandemic, that those who wear masks and those who don't wear masks, those who want to move more quickly to reopen and those less so. And I get that, but I still think that something will break through, on the other side of this, which is, a renewed sense of kinship, perhaps.
You once said, if you're humble, you'll ask the poor what would help you. But if you're led by hubris, then you tell the poor, here's what your problem is, here's how you fix it. How might this look like in the context of the pandemic and the economic crisis at this moment?
Well, I'm. This is what I'm sensing from, again, it's very heartening to be a part of this task force, because you can hear the governor. I mean, they're all quite insistent that they want to humbly listen to the poor and the people who are, in fact, disproportionately impacted by this pandemic. So, I don't really, as far as high-powered as you were mentioning earlier, the CEOs and such, they have gifts and they have knowledge, but they're also humbled at the feet of folks, I think, who contribute, who say, we need to be attentive to the folks who are trying to express how disproportionately impacted their communities actually have been, and for whatever motivation, where people go, we need the grocery clerks, and we need any number of service folks who are in the service industry, or whatever it is to get the community back on its feet. That it needs to be, an equity-driven equality that gets us there, and no solution that isn't that should be accepted.
You were mentioning the kind of contact we can have with each other now. How are the people you work with, and particularly the people you work with at Homeboy, faring in this moment? It must be so hard. I've been reading about people who are usually rely on AA meetings or NA meetings, and it's truly very difficult for them to stay away from their addictions. You work in a very heightened context with gangs and such, and I'm wondering, what do you hear, and how are they faring, the people you care for?
Well, so we've been able, I think, pretty well, and all hands on deck, and people were connecting to each other, case managers, navigators, therapists, going on FaceTime and communicating. A lot of Zooms, recovery meetings that have been really sustaining for people. But you also have, folks who spent 30, 25 years, 20 years in prison.
Right.
And a lot of that in solitary confinement. So there's a lot of gallows humor and a lot of joking about, you think this is bad kind of stuff, which has been very good for the soul and has got everybody through. Having said that, we're kind of hoping to get to the next place, which is to have a modified reopening on May 18th. Since the mayor has indicated that May 15th is when, on some level, you lift the stay-at-home order. So we're trying to figure out how to do that. And Zoom meeting this morning, everybody wants this. Everybody wants to return, because there's no substitute for having your feet planted in that holy, sacred ground over there at Homeboy. So people are looking forward to it. So we're figuring out how to do it to keep our physical distance, and it's hard because we're a tactile group. Everybody hugs everybody 9 times a day, and that's going to change now. So,
did you say tactile group?
say it again.
Did you say tactile? That you're a tactile group? That you?
Yeah, tactile.
Right. I thought
we're very affectionate and very touchy, and everybody hugs everybody, and at the end of the day, everybody hugs goodbye, and so it's going to be hard, because that's part of the air we breathe, and that's not going to be so true anymore.
And it's I think it's such a difficult moment also, speaking with people in the healthcare system, to doctors and nurses and others. It is so hard because they now see family members who no longer can see those who struck by the pandemic and who might be about to die. And I think it must be terrifying because they cannot have that tactile relationship. They cannot bid farewell. I'm wondering, in such situations, insofar that we can, Father Greg, give any advice, what kind of advice can one give in such situations that are so extreme?
Yeah, I don't know. There's just so much you can do. The Serenity Prayer is sort of helpful here because, what can you really do about it? So, one of our trainees, a homegirl who worked, her mom died in a convalescent home, so she couldn't go there to see her. She couldn't be there when she died. And now burying her is it's not a very satisfying moment in terms of closure, and, it's sort of hard to do. So it's tough, and yet there's not a thing you can actually do about it. So how do you lean into the grief of it? How do you allow yourself to be curious about the grief of it so that you can get to some odd place of savoring and even relishing that can break through and then get you to joy. I think that's how we do it. And yet you can't, there are things you just can't do anything about. So the more you can stay anchored in the present moment and accept what is, then the freer you'll be to just love the folks who are right in front of you, which is what we're all called to do.
You can't fabricate.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, it's a strange request, but you were talking about the Serenity Prayer. I'm wondering if in closing you could leave us with a prayer.
Sure. So, loving God, tender one, teach us to be tender. Help us to be in the world who you are, compassionate, loving, and kind. Help us to signal a new way of seeing so that we can see the wholeness in each other and to move beyond the walls that barricade us from each other so that we can be as tender as you are. Amen. Alleluia.
Father Greg Boyle, it's been a pleasure to speak with you. I can't wait to meet you. I lived here in Los Angeles 2 decades ago and heard so much about your work.